Hey everyone, I'm Ariel Adams of aBlogtoWatch, and I'm here in Menlo Park in the Silicon Valley at watch retailer Steven Silver with President Jared Silver. Hey Jared.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Today we're talking about MB&F. Now MB&F is a very special watch brand, especially in this particular part of the world. And I'll begin by saying that when I started aBlogtoWatch back in 2007, just north of here in San Francisco, MB&F was one of the most supportive brands, because they quickly recognized how important it was to get information about their products out to the tech generation, so to say, that was very interested in them. And I had a lot of great experiences here in the Bay Area and the Silicon Valley with tech entrepreneurs who loved MB&F, and that was a really big part of the beginning of my business. Here we are now in 2022, and you're one of the very rare authorized dealers of MB&F and one of the world's epicenters that made it important. Please talk a little bit about what is it that you like about MB&F and how did you get hooked up with them?
So MB&F is one of my personal favorite watch brands. We're extremely proud to be a long-term partner of the brand and to represent them here in Silicon Valley. Initially, I was introduced to MB&F in 2014. Well, I knew of the brand for a long time and been an admirer of their creations and machines, but I was introduced to Max for the very first time in 2015. And we ended up becoming an authorized retailer in 2015 when we met. I'll always remember the dinner where I first met Max. It was me, my father, Max, and the person that was working North America for him at the time. And we sat down, and this was right before the Basel Fair, so we flew in a couple days early. And within minutes, literally minutes of sitting down, we had agreed to work together. And so it was just like an immediate meshing of minds where we saw what he was trying to accomplish and what he was trying to build, and he felt that we were the right partner for him in this part of the world.
Now, MB&F is the type of company that doesn't like to make wristwatches. They say they make wearable kinetic art. Their first watches they called horological machines.
Sometimes tells time, yes.
Once in a while, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, they are very functional watches, but again, I think it's very important to say that they've extended beyond the world of horology into miniaturized sculpture.
Yes.
And that has pulled them into an entire area of appreciation that a lot of watch brands never been able to get to, but they also have developed an entire new niche within the watch industry. But MB&F still seems to do some things that no one else can do. Why do you think that is?
The simple answer is risk-taking. They're not afraid to take risks. One thing I love about Max is that he doesn't make watches for other people. He makes watches for himself. And so if he doesn't sell all of his watches, he doesn't care. And so what I like about this is that it really shows his progression as a designer, but it also shows his consistency as inspiration. So whether you look at the horological machine line or you look at the legacy machine line, every single piece tells a story, and it's extraordinarily well thought out and mindful. So from the movement components, and they don't cut corners. Every movement is a unique and novel caliber, if you will. All the way through to HM9 here, where you see this incredible three-dimensional sapphire case that has this steampunk-like inspiration. There's real innovation in this brand that happens beyond just material design, but also in case construction. This was one of the first three-dimensional gaskets that they created. So it was a gasket to actually hold these pieces together. And it's a marvel to look at, which, all these pieces here, by the way, are all pieces that are owned by customers that were happy to lend them back to us so that we could do this video, which I think is very cool about the MB&F brand, is that you have this almost like, I really feel like an art dealer where you're like giving an allocation of some artist piece of work. And, in this case, we're now a museum for you and aBlogtoWatch to come in and actually see these pieces in person, and then they'll go back to their owners, so they're lending them back to us. So anyways, back to your question, what makes him unique is he's not afraid to take risks. So whether it's this design, he doesn't make watches for you or for me. He makes watches for himself as an artist and a designer. And then, the market either accepts it or they don't accept it. And in the case of Max, he's one of these few visionary designers that we have in the industry today.
One of the things that I think is so important about what MB&F has done is consistency, and the topic that comes to mind for me is transparency.
Yeah.
Before MB&F, Max Büsser worked at Harry Winston doing collaboration projects, which was his favorite with the Opus collection. And he learned exactly how to take manufacturing skill and combine it with design talent. when he founded MB&F, the name MB&F, Max Büsser and Friends, transparency was a big part of it. It's not just me, it's this whole assortment of suppliers and designers and technicians and specialized types of people, and that doesn't even count who's selling the watches as well. You as one of the retailers are one of the friends. Myself as member of the media as one of the friends. And so there's a lot of inclusiveness. And he's also very transparent about why he makes things. He goes into extreme detail about exactly why he did this and exactly why he did that. He's not trying to get you to approve. He's not trying to say he did it for you. He's saying why he did it. And he's saying, I'm putting it out there. And over time, people have recognized that the consistent quality of excellence, of originality, of always trying to be a little bit better, to push the envelope, to continue to outstand the people who have been loyal, the customers around the world. I think these are things that anyone who just looks at any of these watches needs to know, because out of context, this and other brands like it can be incredibly difficult to really wrap your mind around.
Yeah, they're very conceptual. I see every MB&F as a grail piece. And the question is, does that watch's design particularly resonate with you as an individual? I have customers that will only buy horological machines. That's it. They don't want to buy the legacy machines. I also have customers that only buy legacy machine, and I have more customers that like both. They like have a blend of everything. But there are some crazy out there designs. Like the one you're wearing right now, this HM5, is one of my personal all-time favorites. It just screams 70s to me. And when I first show this watch to people, they typically are like, wow, that's beautiful, but like, how do you tell the time, right? And it's so 70s. So Max, for those that don't know, wanted to be a car designer. And so this watch is constructed as a car. And one of his favorite cars is the Lamborghini Miura. And so when I first show this watch to people, they go, oh, okay. And I say, well, this is inspired after the Lamborghini Miura. And it's actually built as a car. You have this engine, which is the movement, and it's a novel, unique caliber. And what it is, it's mounted into a chassis, and that chassis happens to be water resistant, so you can wear this in the water, which is the first MB&F that you could freely swim openly in the water, had a high water resistance. And then the body panels, which look and inspired are after the Lamborghini Miura, are mounted onto that chassis, just like a car. And the dashboard, which is this prism, is actually mirroring the jump wheels that tell the time, the hours and minute wheels. And you can see this as a dashboard, and you're actually looking at an optical illusion of time, because you're not actually looking at the discs.
One of my favorite stories is related to the louvers here.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing where there's a little switch here, and it opens them and closes them.
Yep.
And the purpose here, just adding to the stories, you know this, is to allow light to enter to charge the luminant so that when you read the time through the side, it glows a little bit.
Yeah. That's actually a personal thing for Max Büsser, because when he was a child, he used to put his watch on his nightstand next to his desk, and it would charge the loom up. And when his dad would turn off the light in his room, he would look over and stare at the loom glowing. And that was a very personal story for him. So he wanted to include that in this watch.
Max Büsser has always been really good about storytelling communication, but on top of that, he's made stories relatable by making them personal. What have you learned as a storyteller from Max, especially when it comes to taking what is quite an esoteric kind of product and object sometimes and making it feel like something you've known for a long time?
For me, our job is not to sell these watches, it's to educate people on what the story behind the watch is. And so Max is, I would call him a master storyteller. He's a designer, he's a communicator, he knows how to communicate extraordinarily effectively. He's a very charismatic person. As I've developed, honestly, personally in this industry as a professional, I've learned quite a lot from Max. And it's really about finding that relatable point in something in a product and being able to translate that to whoever you're speaking to. And whether or not they accept it or not, I mean, if you communicated it, they'll understand it. If they love it, that's a personal thing.
When you're in the market for a six-figure watch or more, you do have a lot of options, and multiple of those can be purchased here at Steven Silver. But everyone tends to gravitate to different things that they like. Talk a little bit about the types of people that end up becoming interested in MB&F. What are some things that they share in common, or maybe what are some of their backgrounds that you believe allows them specifically to understand and appreciate the values of MB&F?
So the story of Max is really that of a dreamer and an entrepreneur. And we happen to be surrounded by them here in Silicon Valley. They're creators, engineers, entrepreneurs, and Max in his own right is an entrepreneur, and he is a very creative person. So I remember when we first launched with MB&F, almost everybody in the room was an entrepreneur, and they were fascinated by meeting this guy who had taken this risk, putting all of his money on the line, almost to the very last Swiss franc that he had in his bank account, and he made it successful. So it really resonates with a lot of our customers, and it's actually grown beyond just that at the beginning, because there's people that are serious art collectors now that are coming in and they're looking at MB&F and they see truly mechanical artwork that you can wear on your wrist. And so I have a few customers that don't really enjoy buying watches. They're jewelry customers. They have a deep appreciation for fine gemstones and, let's say, like Art Deco design, or they really enjoy different eras of design that have developed over the centuries. But they're drawn to MB&F. It's really bizarre how similar, like someone who's never bought a watch other than maybe a Rolex and that's their daily wear, but then they're drawn to something like this Flying T. This happens to be one of the 20 that he did in rose gold with Bulgari, and Fabrizio and him worked on this watch together. It was a redesign of the Flying T, which initially was inspired so that the women in his life could wear.
It's interesting because there's so many different sides to the MB&F brand. For a while it was sort of very hardcore. We make mechanical machines. This is not a jewelry watch brand. And then they came out with a collaboration watch with Boucheron.
Yeah.
And now later with Bulgari, different concept visually, of course, but I think sort of the same kind of demographic in mind, a female audience that wants to combine the best of jewelry and watchmaking, and they do that well. One of the things that I think is worth talking about is the difference between the HM, horological machine, and LM, legacy machine products that make up the majority of wristwatches sold by MB&F. How would you explain what the difference between those two sub-collections are?
The horological machines were the first line that Max developed. And initially was that he deconstructed traditional watchmaking and he was taking those components and then he rebuilt them into modern sculptures, but making homage to the mechanics of previous generations. And these are the far more esoteric watches, typically not round. I don't think there's a single one that is round. And that was the core of the brand for many years. And then the legacy machine concepts were you were still taking those same components of traditional watchmaking, deconstructing it, but I guess the design thesis was that Max was moving himself back 100 years. So if he were inspired at the time, like instead of launching his company in 2006, he launched his company in 1906, what would he build with the inspiration that he had around him at that time? And that was the initial design thesis for legacy machines. And that's how, and if you look at that, let's say legacy machine number 2 here, what you have in this LM2 is an honor to all the traditional master watchmakers. So this double balance wheel movement, which is totally three-dimensional and floating above the dial, was initially developed back in the 19th century, but reintroduced by the legendary Philippe Dufour. And Max Büsser, the first time that he saw a duality, which is a watch now that auctions for millions and millions of dollars, if you can even find one, he fell in love with it. And so this is an honor to Philippe Dufour. It's an honor to the master watchmakers. It takes these two balance wheels, averages the rate through a planetary differential, and then when you flip the watch over on the back, you see this just magical finishing. The movement was designed by Jean-Francois Mogen, and it was finished by Kari Voutilainen. And it's just quintessentially for Kari Voutilainen enthusiasts, this is some of his finest finishing, and it's so quintessentially him. When you look at it, you can see just that's got Kari's work all over it.
LM2 is so fantastic. Thank you for showing me that.
Yeah, it's one of my personal favorites. And what's also a very interesting thing from a technical perspective is that to tune this watch and finish it, takes more time than most tourbillons, because you have to stop one balance wheel, calibrate one, then calibrate the second, and then you have to let them run and calibrate them together to make sure that it's dialing the timekeeping.
These are important details because people gloss over this stuff. They look at it and they think, what a pretty animation, but to make it all work requires sometimes incredible feats.
It's got to work.
One of the things I think is so great about MB&F is that, like you said, there's multiple audiences that can be interested. they have taken a lot of the things that have been valued in traditional watchmaking and rendered them in one way or another, whether it's finishing, whether it's a tourbillon, whether it's various types of complications. But it's interesting that, if you don't even like design, you can appreciate them purely from the ability to execute a concept.
Yeah.
And if you have no idea what's going on and all these spinning parts, you can still appreciate it from a design perspective. And what comes to mind in terms of how he does that is he has assembled what you will an all-star team, right? There isn't just one person. There is a team working on the outside. There's a team working on the inside. There's a team working on making sure that it's finished nicely. And it's the accumulation of this effort, Max Büsser and friends, which makes this finished product. And I think what a lot of people appreciate, especially from the entrepreneurial world, is the collaborative approach to putting it together. There isn't one person that could have done this. Philippe Dufour is a master and he can do everything himself, but he makes a very specific kind of traditional watch. This requires multiple collaborators to come in to produce. And I think that it's wonderful from the perspective of someone who's trying to create something to see that in such a tangible form. And so I agree with you that for the creators and engineers in the Silicon Valley, this really represents a lot of their ideals.
Absolutely. What I like about MB&F is that they've won quite a lot of awards, but it's not just for design or for technical development, even though, so this perpetual calendar, right, the Legacy Machine Perpetual, this is my personal piece. I love it. It fixed the perpetual calendar, right? They finally designed a movement that was an idiot-proof perpetual calendar, so it's perfect for me. But Stephen McDonald, who happens to be, by the way, the brains behind the sequential chronograph that was just released, that's what's so amazing about Max, is that he can find these people, and they actually reach out to him. They'll reach out to him because they have an idea, and if they were to go to some other manufacturer, they'd probably have the doors shut in their face. But Max embraces it, and he's willing to take that risk. And by the way, he also gives them credit, which a lot of brands don't. And that's something that's very, very unique. And that is something that I think Max is really trying to fix, is that he wants to put their name on the movement. And I love that transparency personally.
Jared, some brands have a bad reputation for being quite selective in terms of who gets their watches. Brand sells out of everything they get. They can't sell to everyone. They have to determine who's going to get their watches. MB&F specifically wants to make sure that its products tend to be available to those that want them. So talk a little bit about what happens in the background to handle the fact that there's more demand that you can handle, but you really want to be democratic with the types of people that have the MB&F experience.
Sure. So we're blessed right now to have put the hard work and energy into building a really strong collector base. So over the years, Max has attracted some of the most discerning and loyal collectors in the world. So we're lucky right now. We have wait lists going into 2025 for some MB&F models, which is great. But it also sometimes can put some people off because they're like, how do I get one if these people have these long wait lists? And what's really great about MB&F is, one, they really care about where every single watch goes. And it's not just new watches, it's also pre-owned. Because now they produce between like 280 and 300 watches depending on the year. But historically, there have been years where they only produced 80 watches, 120 watches. So there's not that many out there in the world. So they're really mindful about certified pre-owned. So for us, we do get trade-ins. That's a great place to start and to develop a relationship with the brand. And that word relationship is really important. There is a real relationship between collectors and the brand MB&F and the retailers as well, because we're all in this together. And for me, it's my job to really get to know our collectors well, introduce them to the brand and represent them. And so what I love about the MB&F team is they're constantly here visiting us. We have collector dinners regularly, not just like once a year or twice a year. Usually 5 to 6 times a year I'm having dinner with the folks at MB&F. They're taking my customers, they're getting to know new people. They've made allocations specifically to people and they get to know them. So if there's a collector out there that really wants to get into MB&F, it's all about developing a relationship. And we're here to do that. It's actually one of the greatest joys that I have as a retailer is getting to know passionate people that want to get specifically into one brand. And in MB&F, the brand really wants to get to know them. So most of my collectors of MB&F have met Max Büsser. And they've had dinner with him, they've spent time with him, and he enjoys it just as much as they do.
That's great insight. And just trying to depack the important things you say, if you want an MB&F watch and you can't buy one today, continue to show your interest.
Yes.
You, the authorized dealer, and the brand will notice, and that continued attention will be rewarded at some point.
Absolutely.
Jared, thank you so much for showing me these great MB&F watches, some of them from customers for this little museum between the watches that have been brought here as well as the ones that you have for sale. A fantastic selection, and it's so great to be with any of the rare MB&F authorized dealers. You're so imbued with the stories that really make the brand what it is. So I'm really excited for you to share more of these stories with people that come into Steven Silver.
Thank you.
This has been a conversation with Jared Silver, president of Steven Silver, about MB&F. If you're in the area, come on down to here in Menlo Park to see what they have available. It's a fantastic, interesting watchmaker. They are an authorized dealer. Thank you so much, Jared.
Thank you for coming in.